Beyond Our Bias, facilitated by Andre Koen. Thank you so much for joining me in this learning unit as we try to explore ways to get beyond our bias. Our agenda for this session is a simple one. We will, 1, understand conscious and unconscious bias. 2, identify how our biases impact the way we interact with people. And 3, learn ways to move beyond tolerance and beyond our bias to actually be helpful to our coworkers and the people around us. So what is unconscious bias and stereotype threat? Participants will also have a chance to explore in greater detail the learning modules around unconscious bias and stereotype threat, as well as be introduced to the discussion guides they can use with their teams to discuss these topics. Theoretical underpinnings. First and foremost, we want to recognize that there are group norms that will be established as a part of this session that we'd like for you to think about as you engage with groups in talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion and exploring our bias. One is to listen with the responsibility of being changed, recognizing that I can be changed by other people's experiences if I'm open to at least hearing the words and their heart and their intentions as they speak those words. We also encourage people to speak with the promise of being heard. So recognizing that even if you don't have the right words, you don't know what to quite say, but if you use your voice, you will be heard, particularly in this context, in this setting. And so that being heard means that, whether you're typing in a chat room, whether you're engaging in a curriculum piece and you're sharing information with others in that space, that it is their responsibility to try to hear what you're saying, both through your words and through your intentions. And so asking clarifying questions will be extremely important and encouraged. Be present and bring your best self to having these conversations, right? So many of us believe that we can multitask or we can do many things at one time. What research says is that actually what we do is we divide the attention that we have into smaller pieces. And so we ask that you bring all of your full self into this conversation and that you bring your best self. Now, what is the best self? The best self is a measurement that you create based on your past and previous performance. And so you know what your best self is. And we will make the assumption that you're bringing that best self into this conversation. Recognizing also that everyone has something to learn and something to share. And so some people will say, well, I've been in this conversation before, or I've sat with this person before. What I'd like for you to do is think about the opportunities that you have with the topic, with the information, as well as the people that you're communicating with, and look at this more as peeling back the layers of an onion, more so than just looking at a piece of a fruit that you can, a pear, for example, right? But really think about what are the different layers and how do we get down to the core piece by piece through sharing and communicating with one another. We will also need everyone in the organization. So we're encouraging people, just not in your group, not just in your session, but throughout the organization to contribute to this conversation. We also would like for folks to be willing to experience discomfort. I'm not sure if folks have tried a new exercise regimen or have tried to do some athletic thing that is not come natural to them, but we recognize that there's a learning curve to any new endeavor, and that learning curve oftentimes feels very uncomfortable or presents itself in a way that We're not at our best, but we know that through trial and error and lots of practice, we actually can get good at that particular piece. So, be willing to experience discomfort. And lastly, accept and recognize that we may not come to closure on concepts or ideas, because this is a journey. This is not a destination. When we talk about recognizing our own unconscious bias, or we talk about stereotype threat, we're really talking about a journey of discovery more than we are about a particular destination. So please think about these theoretical underpinnings, these ground rules, if you will, as you participate in this learning unit, but also think about how these might be applied, or how they might be helpful outside of this learning environment. So we're going to talk a little bit about this idea of core values. And so at this point in the presentation, what I typically do is I have people write down the things that they value in the orange circle. So there are 5 things that folks value. You value many more than 5, but I'd like for you to select out of those just 5 things that you value, and to place them in one of those circles. So you'll have 5 things, one in each of the orange circles. And while you're doing that, what I typically do when we're in a group session is have people find folks who have very similar values. What we'll do with you in this particular presentation is that we'll share a screen, and what I'd like for you to do is to put your values up on the screen. And if you see values that are very similar to yours or exactly like yours, I want you to put a check or circle that value with the tools provided in this session. So we'll just leave a couple of minutes now and let you go through that exercise. All right. So writing down your values, or the things that are important to you, right? So there could be a person, a significant other, a grandchild. It could be a place like Belize or Bemidji. It could be a thing like a motorcycle or a cabin. It could be a concept like freedom or justice, right? So we'll give you just a couple of minutes to write down those 5 values. All right, now that you've written those values, we'll go to the next screen. And what I want you to do is I want you to share those values. And like I said before, I either want you to put a check mark next to the ones that are similar to yours, or put a circle around the ones that are similar to your values. Wonderful, wonderful. What did you notice about those values that people wrote down? You probably noticed that in many ways they're very similar, right? And so we share a lot of the same values, but not every value that was written was also the same as other people's values, right? So what I'd like for you to do is to think about diversity in this way, or write this down as something to remember about diversity. That diversity is the accounting for and the respecting of our commonalities and our differences at the same time. Right? So respect for diversity really is about looking at these commonalities and these differences at the same time. So many of us we've had many of the same human experiences. We've been hungry, we've been in love, we've been out of love, we've yearned for something, we've had goals, and so those very human experiences is something that we all share. Right? Many of you, so that's something that we all share. what we also have to recognize is that the context that we've come from have made our experiences or the methods we've tried to use to reach those yearnings and those longings very different, right? So I am African American. The government describes me as African American. And what we have to recognize that is that I'm much more than African American, right? So I'm a father and I'm a husband. I'm a human being. Simultaneously, if I don't recognize how the world sees me, I will do myself a disservice, right? The government refers to me as African American. And so the world treats me the way that has been set up. And so it's important that people recognize, my wide nose and my curly hair and the brownness of my skin, because that is a filter that is used oftentimes to interact with me, but also changes how I end up interacting with the world. And so that is a lens that I have to be mindful of. But it is not the only thing that I am, right? And so when we think about diversity, it is our commonalities and our differences simultaneously. And so we have to recognize both of those. And that is a difficult thing to do, to hold two what some folks might say opposing viewpoints at the same time. But as leaders, we're asked to do things that other folks aren't able to or willing to do. And so when we think about diversity, it is about our commonalities and our differences. And so what I'd also like to do is to kind of talk about the larger part of this circle. And this is the circle of all human knowledge. And in this part of the circle, we typically talk about or refer to our what we know as human beings, right? So oftentimes in presentations, I use the circle as a demonstration for, well, I'll just do it. I'll do it with you right now, right? So this is the circle of all human knowledge. Ah, ha, 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 ha. Okay, my maniacal laughter is a bit much. But the point is that this contains everything that human beings can know. And so what I'd like for you to do is to cut yourself a slice of this pie, if you will, of what you know of all there is to know, right? So just, write on your paper, or you can do it on the screen. Just draw yourself a piece of pie the size of what you know, right? And for most of us, it's not a very big piece. Like I know my name, I know how to get dressed, I know the days of the week, right? I know my job pretty well. So those are things that I certainly know. The next thing I like for you to do with the same diagram is to draw a piece of pie the size of what you are aware of that you do not know. What you know, you don't know. So for me, as an example, I know that I don't know how to fly. I don't know how to fly an airplane. I know that I don't know Mandarin Chinese. I know that I can't swim long distances, right? So those are things that I know, I'm aware of, right? And so I'd like for you to cut yourself a piece of pie of the things that you know you don't know, or things you are aware of that are not in your frame of reference, or things you know, right? So for me, when I draw this piece, it's considerably larger than my first piece, right? So what I know is pretty narrow. The second piece is pretty broad, and I know some of you out there are like, well, that's just the rest of the pie. I just want you to work with me and make it quantifiable, right? So quantify that second piece. And so there are tons of things that are outside of our awareness that might be contained in this second piece. So then what is going on with the rest of the pie? So I think many of you have probably caught on to the where we're going with this. So we talked about what we knew. We gave examples of what we know we don't know. And what is that third piece of pie? It is what we don't know, or our blind spot. right? So it's our blind spot. So somewhere on your paper, somewhere on the screen, go ahead and write the words blind spot. Now, the interesting thing about these three pieces, this circle, this pie, if you will, we could call that your paradigm. We can call that whole pie, what you know you don't know, and what you and your blind spot. We can call that your paradigm, and that's Paradigm. I used to say paradigm. I was hooked on phonics. It worked for me, right? But so we this paradigm. So what is a paradigm? And a paradigm simply is how you see the world. And so whose primary responsibility was it to give us our first set of paradigm? It was our parents, our guardians, the people who raised us, right? That they gave us what they knew they didn't know, and their blind spot. And where, pray tell, do you think they got their paradigm? That's right, from their guardians, from their community, from the people who raised them. And where do you think they got? Yes, you're getting it, right? So they all got this same kind of paradigm. And what we have to recognize is that if we don't see the gaps or the problems or the blind spots within our own paradigm, then it becomes difficult to move forward. Has anyone ever received a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy? Yeah. So when you receive that copy, or we used to say Xerox, when you receive that copy and it's been copied multiple times, does it look exactly like the original? And typically it does not look exactly like the original. It's been changed or augmented in some way. And so when we think about the paradigms that have been passed down to us, the one question we should ask is it possible that the message that I'm receiving could actually be different than the message that was sent, or the rationale that it was created for, right? So there's a story that I like to tell, and then we'll move on, that there are three generations of women preparing a holiday meal. There's a mother, a daughter, and the grandmother. And so the mother and daughter are in the kitchen, and the mother is, trying to let's just say the holiday meal was a turkey, and so she's trying to saw this turkey in half, and so the daughter is concerned by this whole process, and so she says, "Mom, why are you cutting the turkey in half?" And she says, the juices the juices flow better, and all is tenderized and all this stuff. And the daughter doesn't buy it, so she presses the mother a little further, and the mother gets frustrated. And the mother says, finally, with all these questions, she said, go ask your grandmother why I'm cutting the turkey in half. And so the granddaughter's like pretty inquisitive, so she goes over to the grandmother and says, "Grandmother, Mom is cutting the turkey in half, and she told me to ask you why she's cutting the turkey in half." And so the grandmother looks at her and she says, "No, she's not, baby." And she said, "Yes, Grandma, she is. She is cutting this turkey in half. And why is she doing that?" And the grandmother looked at her and she said, "Because I did." Now, the young lady is really perplexed, because she's like, is this a generational thing? Like, what is going on? And so then the grandmother explains further. She said, "Baby, I cut the turkey in half because that's the only way it would fit in the oven." And the daughter puts her hands to her head and she just laughs and chuckles. And what she realizes is that the mother is doing what the grandmother did, but doesn't recognize that she doesn't have to do it because her oven is big enough to fit this turkey. So how often in our lives are we operating off of paradigms that we've inherited without really checking those things out, or looking for not just confirmation in the world, but actually this cognitive dissonance that could help us create a new neural pathway for information that was given to us through the generations. So think about that. Think about this paradigm, and we'll take a short break right now.